At the edge of a quiet town stood an old, forgotten lane. Most people avoided it. The houses there were broken, the walls cracked, and the streets filled with old plastic bags and bottles. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stop, where no one cared enough to fix what was broken. But among the silence, in one small corner behind a half-fallen wall, life still tried to survive. A thin mother dog had made that corner her home. She had found it months ago, maybe longer. No one knew where she came from, but it was clear she had been alone for a long time. Her fur was dusty, her ribs were slightly visible, and her eyes showed both exhaustion and love. Beside her, curled up tightly, were her tiny puppies, still too young to open their eyes fully. She protected them as best as she could. Every sound, every movement made her alert. She didn't have much to offer them, just her warmth and the little food she could find. Every morning, when the sun rose, she left her babies in that corner and went out searching. Her legs trembled from weakness, but she pushed on because she had to. Somewhere in the garbage bins behind the market, she would always find a scrap of bread, a piece of rice, or a bone left behind. People saw her sometimes. Some even threw stones to scare her away from the trash. Others just ignored her. A few felt pity, but in the rush of their own lives, they didn't stop. She became just another shadow moving quietly through the streets, just another stray among many. But for her puppies, she was everything. Their mother, their warmth, their whole world. As the days passed, life didn't get easier. The weather turned cold and nights grew harsh. The little ones cried softly when the wind blew through the cracks in their shelter. The mother tried to keep them close, wrapping her body around them to block the chill. She hardly slept. Her eyes stayed open most of the night, watching, listening, guarding. Sometimes when the streets were empty and quiet, she would walk slowly to the road, looking into the distance. It was as if she was waiting for something or maybe someone to notice her. But no one came. A few blocks away, people carried on with their daily routines. They went to work, cooked dinner, watched TV, and scrolled through their phones. Life moved normally for them. No one thought about the tiny family hidden under that broken wall. The distance between the two worlds was only a few streets, but it felt like miles apart. One day, the sky turned gray. Heavy rain started pouring down. Within minutes, the small lane turned muddy. Water flowed into every corner. The mother tried to move her puppies to a drier spot, but the ground was soaked. The old wall leaked water, and soon their small shelter became wet and cold. She picked each puppy carefully with her mouth, one by one, and placed them under a tin sheet she found nearby. It wasn't much, but it helped for a while. The rain didn't stop for hours. Her fur became drenched. She shivered but refused to leave her babies. Hunger clawed at her stomach, but she stayed still, her body blocking the cold wind. When the rain finally ended, the street was filled with puddles and debris. She stepped out, weak and tired, to search for food again. That day she found almost nothing. The market trash had been washed away. She sniffed every corner, but the ground was bare. Her paws were muddy, her legs shaky. Still, she didn't give up. She had a reason to keep walking. Her babies were waiting. When she returned to the shelter, her heart sank. One of the puppies was lying still, colder than the rest. She nudged it gently, then again, but it didn't move. The world went quiet around her. She sat there for a long time, her head low, her eyes full of confusion and sadness. She didn't understand why one of her little ones had gone still. She only knew that something was missing. The other puppies whimpered softly. She pulled them close and licked them gently. It was her way of saying, "I'm still here." She stayed awake that night, guarding the remaining ones. The pain of loss was heavy, but her love was stronger. She had to keep going. The next morning, the sun came out and the streets sparkled with leftover rainwater. Life returned to its usual rhythm for everyone else, but for the little family, it was another day of survival. The mother dog went out again, her eyes scanning every shadow for food. She found a small piece of bread near a gate and carried it back carefully. She didn't eat until her puppies had eaten first. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, the puppies began to grow. Their eyes opened fully, and they started to explore their small world. They stumbled and fell, chasing each other clumsily. For a few moments each day, even the mother seemed to forget her struggles as she watched them play. Their joy gave her strength. Every wag of their tiny tails reminded her why she kept fighting. But the truth was, they were still alone. No one came near that part of the street. The only sound was the rustle of leaves, the barking of distant dogs, and the occasional noise of passing vehicles. Sometimes footsteps echoed nearby, and she would quickly hide her puppies. She had learned long ago not to trust humans easily. She had seen too many being chased away, too many left behind. Still, deep inside, there was a tiny spark of hope. Maybe one day someone kind would find them. Maybe someone would stop and see that they weren't just strays. They were lives trying to survive just like anyone else. Then one morning, everything felt different. The air was still and the sunlight seemed brighter. The mother had gone out early to find food. She walked past a small grocery shop where 2 children were waiting for their school bus. One of them pointed toward her and said softly, "Look, that dog is so thin." The other child nodded, watching quietly. Their mother, standing beside them, noticed too. She sighed and said, "Poor thing," before turning away as the bus arrived. For a moment, the mother dog stood there watching the bus leave. The street fell silent again. Then she turned and walked back toward her home. When she reached the corner, she lay down beside her puppies and licked their faces. They wagged their little tails, crawling on top of her. For a brief second, everything felt peaceful. She didn't know it yet, but her life and theirs was about to change forever. Someone was about to step in. Someone would finally notice, but that moment hadn't come yet. For now, she was still alone in that broken corner, holding her small family close, dreaming of warmth and safety. The day would end like many others, with tired eyes, an empty stomach, and a heart full of silent hope. She didn't know that miles away, there were people who cared about animals like her, people who couldn't turn away once they saw suffering. She didn't know that her picture, her story, and her pain would soon reach hearts that believed kindness still mattered. She didn't know that help was on the way. For now, she was just a mother, doing what mothers do, protecting, loving, and surviving. Even in the coldest corners of the world, love still burned quietly, waiting to be seen. The little family huddled together as the sky turned orange. The day was ending, but life hadn't given up on them yet. Somewhere out there, humanity was about to step in, and when it did, everything would change. Days kept passing in that lonely corner of the street. The mother dog and her puppies were still fighting to survive, just like before. Each morning began the same way. The mother would stand up slowly, stretch her tired legs, and look at her babies sleeping close to each other. Their small bellies moved up and down as they breathed softly. For a moment, she would just stare at them, as if gathering the strength to face another day. Then, with a quiet sigh, she would walk away to search for food again. The street was quiet in the early hours. The sun had barely risen, and a cool breeze moved through the broken houses. The smell of old garbage and smoke filled the air. The mother walked carefully, keeping her distance from people. She had learned that not everyone was kind. Some shouted at her to go away. Some threw stones or chased her with sticks, and most just ignored her. But still, she kept going, nose close to the ground, searching for anything she could bring back. Most days, she found almost nothing. Sometimes she would lick an empty food wrapper, hoping to taste even a drop of something. Sometimes she would find a dry piece of bread or a few grains of rice. It wasn't enough for her, let alone her puppies. But she carried whatever she found back to them, tail low but eyes full of determination. When she returned, her puppies would run toward her, their tiny paws making soft sounds on the dirt. She would drop the food, letting them eat first, watching them with love and patience. As days turned into weeks, the puppies started to grow a little. Their eyes were bright, and they had begun to walk around the corner where they lived. They played with each other, biting gently, wagging their tails, and chasing shadows. Their laughter, if dogs could laugh, filled that small broken space with life. For a few moments every day, everything felt normal. The mother would lie down, resting her tired body while her babies tumbled over her legs. It was the only joy she knew, but survival was still a daily fight. The weather was changing again. The sky had started to stay gray, and sometimes strong winds blew dust into their shelter. Nights became colder. The mother did everything she could to keep her puppies warm. She pressed them close, wrapping her body around them. Her fur wasn't thick anymore, but her warmth was enough to comfort them. She hardly slept. Even when her eyes were closed, her ears stayed alert for every sound. One night, a group of dogs barked loudly in the distance. The noise echoed through the empty streets. The mother lifted her head, tense and watchful. She had seen what hunger could make other strays do, but that night no one came close. She stayed awake until the barking faded away and the world grew quiet again. The next morning, the mother went out earlier than usual. She could feel her strength fading. Her legs were thin and her movements slow. Still, she refused to stop. She followed the smell of food to the back of a restaurant. There, behind a pile of boxes, she found a few scraps of cooked rice. Her tail wagged slightly as she picked up what she could carry in her mouth. She didn't eat a single grain. Her babies were waiting, and that was all that mattered. When she reached her corner, the puppies ran toward her again. She dropped the food and watched them eat. Their joy gave her peace. She lay down beside them, tired but calm. The sun touched their little shelter, and for a few moments it felt like warmth had returned to their world. But life had other plans. A few days later, the weather turned rough again. This time it wasn't rain, it was the dry season. The air became hot and the ground burned under their paws. Finding water became harder than finding food. The mother searched everywhere. She followed the sound of dripping pipes and even waited near people washing their hands outside shops. Sometimes she managed to lick a few drops from the ground. Most days she came back thirsty, her tongue dry. The puppies didn't understand what was happening. They cried softly when they were hungry or thirsty. The mother tried to comfort them, licking their faces and staying close. She looked at the sky, as if asking for help from someone who wasn't there, but she never gave up. Every morning she went out again, hoping that today would be better than yesterday. One afternoon, as the sun was setting, she noticed something strange. A few children were playing nearby. They saw her and pointed. She froze, ready to run. But one of the kids threw a small biscuit toward her. It landed near her paws. She looked at it for a long moment, unsure if it was safe. Then carefully she picked it up. It was the first time in weeks that a human had shown even a small kindness. She didn't stay long. She ran back to her shelter, biscuit still in her mouth. Her puppies jumped around as she broke it into small pieces and let them eat. That small act of kindness gave her new strength. Still, most of the town didn't notice her. People walked by, cars passed, and the days went on like nothing was happening. The mother and her puppies lived in the shadows of human life, invisible to most eyes. But every day they survived was a victory, a quiet, unseen victory of love and willpower. One evening, the sky darkened again. The wind carried the smell of another storm. The mother grew restless. She gathered her puppies closer and moved them to a safer spot under a pile of old wood. She stayed awake through the night as thunder rolled in the distance. The rain came soon after, not as heavy as before, but cold and sharp. Water dripped from the tin sheet above them. The puppies whimpered, and she licked them gently, whispering in her way that everything would be okay. Morning came slowly. The world was wet and quiet. The mother stepped outside to check if the street was safe. Her paws splashed in small puddles. She was tired, but she didn't stop moving. She had learned that if she stopped, her family might not survive. She found a few pieces of bread near a trash bin and carried them back. But by the time she returned, her body was shaking from exhaustion. She lay down beside her puppies, breathing slowly. They climbed over her, happy to see her again, unaware of how much she had struggled for that simple meal. Despite the hardship, something in her heart never broke. Maybe it was the love for her puppies, or maybe it was hope. Small, quiet hope that life could still get better. She didn't know how or when, but she kept believing. And then one day something happened that she didn't expect. That morning felt just like any other. The mother went out to find food. She was walking near a small shop when a kind-looking person noticed her. The person stopped and watched her for a moment. There was something about her eyes, tired, sad, but full of love, that caught their attention. They didn't chase her away. Instead, they quietly took out a small packet of biscuits, broke it, and placed it on the ground. The mother hesitated, watching carefully. When she felt it was safe, she moved forward and took a small bite. It was the first good food she had eaten in a long time. The person smiled softly, then walked away, leaving more food behind. The mother waited until they were gone before she picked up the rest and carried it back to her puppies. It was a simple moment, but it was enough to change everything. For the first time in months, someone had noticed her, not with fear or anger, but with kindness. That evening, she sat outside her shelter for a while, watching the sunset. The puppies played beside her, rolling on the ground and chasing each other's tails. She looked at them with tired but gentle eyes. Something inside her told her that maybe, just maybe, their time of suffering was coming to an end. She didn't know it yet, but help was getting closer. The same person who fed her that morning would come back again. And this time, they wouldn't leave without her. But for now, The small family stayed together in their little corner, unaware of what the next day would bring. The street was quiet again, the air calm after a long day. The mother lay down, her puppies snuggled against her. She closed her eyes not because she was safe yet, but because she still believed that one day she would be. That hope, small but steady, was what kept her alive. It was what carried her through hunger, cold, and fear. She didn't know it yet, but her story was about to change. The world that had turned its back on her was finally starting to turn toward her. The morning began quietly, just like every other day in that forgotten lane. The mother dog woke up before the sun fully rose. Her puppies were sleeping close to her, their small bodies warm against the cold ground. She looked at them lovingly, her eyes filled with both care and worry. She had been fighting for them for weeks, doing everything she could to keep them alive. But she was tired, her legs weak, her fur rough, her stomach empty. Still, she couldn't stop. She had no choice but to keep going. She stretched slowly, gave each puppy a soft lick, and stepped out into the street. The air was cool and a faint light touched the rooftops. Her paws made soft sounds on the road as she walked toward the market area again. That was the only place where she could sometimes find food. The streets were starting to wake up. Shopkeepers lifted shutters, buses honked, and the smell of breakfast filled the air. She walked carefully, keeping her distance from people. She had learned long ago that most didn't want her around. But today, something different was waiting for her. At a small corner near a grocery shop, a person was standing with a bag of food. The person had seen her a few times before, wandering weakly through the street. Every time her eyes had spoken of hunger and helplessness. Something about her face had stayed in their mind. The quiet way she carried herself, her protective nature toward her puppies, and the sadness in her tired eyes. That morning, the person had decided to follow her from a distance just to see where she went. They watched as the mother dog sniffed around searching for scraps. After a while, she walked toward the empty part of the street where the broken wall stood. The person followed slowly, careful not to scare her. When they reached the corner and peeked behind the wall, they froze for a moment. There, in that small, messy space, were the puppies, tiny, innocent, and full of life. They stumbled over each other, wagging their little tails, waiting for their mother to return. The person felt their heart ache at the sight. The mother had built a world for them out of nothing, protecting them from a world that had forgotten them. When the mother saw the person standing there, she stopped immediately. Her body tensed, her eyes wide with fear. She had faced people before who weren't kind. She stood between her puppies and the stranger, ready to protect them if needed. The person didn't move closer. Instead, they sat down a few feet away, quietly placing some food on the ground, a few pieces of bread and a small bowl of water. Then they waited. Minutes passed. The mother didn't move. Her puppies peeked from behind her legs, curious but unsure. The smell of food filled the air. Hunger battled fear inside her heart. Slowly, step by step, she walked closer. The person stayed still, not saying a word. When she reached the food, she looked at them once more before taking a small bite. Her body shook slightly as if still afraid, but the food gave her a little strength. She looked back at her puppies, then at the person again. Something inside her began to soften. The person smiled gently and whispered softly, "It's okay." They didn't try to touch her. They just watched quietly as she ate and then carried some food back to her puppies. For the first time, she didn't have to dig through trash or fight for leftovers. For the first time, someone had given her food out of kindness. The next day, the person came back again. They brought more food and placed it in the same spot. The mother recognized them now. She still kept her distance, but she didn't hide anymore. The person watched as the puppies came out to eat beside their mother. Their small tails wagged happily, their bellies finally full. The person took a few pictures, not to show off, but to ask for help. They knew one person alone couldn't do everything, but maybe together people could. Later that day, the pictures were shared with a small rescue group online. The message was simple. A mother dog and her puppies are living behind a broken wall. They need help. Within hours, the message spread. Volunteers started discussing how to reach the family. They planned to visit, bring supplies, and take the dogs to safety once they gained the mother's trust. Meanwhile, the mother and her puppies went on with their little lives. The mother began to expect the person each morning. She waited near the corner, tail moving slightly whenever she saw them coming. Her eyes, once dull and tired, began to shine again. She didn't understand much about humans, but she could feel kindness. She could feel that this one was different. One afternoon when the person arrived, the mother was resting with her puppies. The sunlight touched their faces, making their fur glow softly. The person sat quietly, just watching them. The sight was both heartbreaking and beautiful, a small family surviving through love alone. The person took more pictures and videos, determined to make sure someone would help them soon. That evening, the rescue group made a plan. They would come the next morning with food, blankets, and a cage. Not to trap, but to safely move the dogs to a shelter. The person who had been feeding them agreed to be there too, to help calm the mother. The next day came with a bright, clear sky. The sound of footsteps and soft voices filled the lane as the rescue team arrived. The mother heard them before she saw them. She stood up, alert and protective, placing herself between her puppies and the strangers. Her heart raced, unsure what was happening. The familiar person stepped forward first, holding food in their hand. Their voice was calm, gentle, full of reassurance. "It's okay," they said softly. "We're here to help." The mother watched closely. The smell of food reached her nose, and she relaxed slightly. She still didn't trust the new people, but she trusted the one who had been coming every day. She watched as they moved slowly, laying down a blanket near her puppies. The rescue workers stayed patient, speaking softly. No one tried to grab her. They waited for her to make the first move. After a few minutes, the mother took a small step forward. Then another. The kind person offered her food again. When she finally came close, the rescue workers moved gently, placing a soft leash around her neck. She didn't fight back. It was as if she knew this was the moment she had been waiting for all along. Her eyes met the person's eyes, full of quiet trust. The puppies were lifted one by one and placed into a cozy basket. They cried softly, confused but unharmed. The mother watched carefully but didn't panic. She stayed near them, making sure they were safe. Once everyone was ready, the rescue team carried them to the van. The person who had first found them followed close behind, their heart full of hope. As the van door closed, the mother looked out through the small window. The broken wall, the cold street, the trash, and the loneliness, all of it was now behind her. For the first time in her life, she was leaving that dark corner not in fear but in hope. The ride to the shelter was quiet. The puppies huddled together in their basket, and the mother lay beside them. Every few minutes, the kind person looked back at them, making sure they were okay. They could see that the mother's eyes were different now, not empty but alive. When they reached the shelter, warm hands greeted them. Bowls of clean water and fresh food waited. The smell of safety filled the air. The puppies began to explore the new space, their tiny tails wagging happily. The mother looked around, unsure at first, then slowly relaxed. She could feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: peace. That night, as she lay on a soft blanket surrounded by her babies, the mother closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she wasn't scared of the dark. She didn't have to listen for danger. She didn't have to search for food. She was finally safe. The person who had found her stood quietly nearby, watching her rest. Their heart was full. They had seen the worst and best of humanity in those few days. They knew there were still people who cared, people who wouldn't walk past suffering. That small act of kindness had changed not just one life, but several. And as the night grew quiet, the shelter lights glowing softly, the mother and her puppies slept peacefully. Their story of pain had turned into a story of hope. They didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time it felt bright. Somewhere outside, in the same town that had once ignored them, the wind carried a new message, a reminder that even in a world full of indifference, kindness can still find its way. Humanity had stepped in and life had started to bloom again. The days passed slowly in the shelter, but each one felt brighter than the last. The mother dog and her puppies had finally found safety. For the first time in their lives, they didn't have to worry about rain, hunger, or fear. Their new home was clean, warm, and filled with soft voices and gentle hands. The shelter staff and volunteers took turns caring for them. They gave the mother food that was fresh and warm, not scraps from the street. Bowls of clean water were always nearby. Her puppies had soft blankets to sleep on and toys to play with. Everything felt new, almost unreal. At first, the mother didn't understand this new world. She stayed close to her puppies, watching every person who came near. Her body was still tense, her eyes full of questions. She had learned to be careful. Life had taught her not to trust easily, but here no one shouted, no one threw things, and no one turned away. Instead, the people spoke softly, using calm voices that sounded like comfort. They moved slowly, giving her time to feel safe. Every time someone brought food, she watched quietly until she realized they meant no harm. Slowly, she began to relax. Her health started to improve too. The vets treated her wounds, cleaned her fur, and gave her medicine to make her stronger. She didn't fight them. It was as if she understood they were helping. Her fur, once dull and dirty, began to shine again. Her ribs were no longer visible. She could finally rest without fear of losing her babies to hunger or cold. Her puppies were full of energy. They ran around the room chasing each other, falling, getting back up and wagging their tiny tails. Their laughter filled the shelter, spreading joy to everyone around. The staff loved them instantly. Every visitor who came by would stop to watch them play. Some took pictures, some offered to donate food or blankets. Slowly, their story started to spread online. The same person who had rescued them posted their story on social media. The post wasn't fancy, it just told the truth. It said how a mother dog had been living behind a broken wall with her puppies, forgotten by everyone until a few kind people decided to help. There were pictures of her before and after the rescue. The difference was so clear. In the first photo, she looked weak and tired, her eyes full of sadness. In the new one, her eyes were bright and gentle, her body healthy, her puppies happy. People couldn't believe the change. Within hours, the story went viral. Thousands of people shared it. Some wrote messages like, "Thank you for helping them," or "This made my day." Donations started coming in from strangers who wanted to support the shelter. Food, blankets, medicines, and toys began to arrive. The small rescue center, which often struggled with limited funds, suddenly had more support than ever before. All because one family of dogs had reminded people what kindness could do. The mother didn't understand the internet, of course, but she could feel the difference. More people came to visit to see her and her puppies. She could sense love in their voices, warmth in their eyes. She began to wag her tail more often. When someone reached out to pet her gently, she no longer backed away. She started trusting again. It was a small miracle, proof that even a broken heart can heal with enough kindness. The volunteers grew attached to her. They called her the brave mother. Everyone admired how she had fought so hard for her puppies. Some even said she had more courage than most people. Watching her care for her babies reminded them that love doesn't need words, it just needs action. As weeks passed, the puppies grew stronger. Their little legs became steady, and their fur looked soft and shiny. Each one had a unique personality. One was playful and always tried to grab attention. Another was quiet but loved to snuggle close to anyone sitting near. They were all full of life and joy. Seeing them grow gave the staff a sense of pride and happiness. They knew that the pain and suffering these dogs had gone through was finally behind them. One evening, as the sun set behind the shelter walls, the mother sat quietly watching her puppies play. The golden light fell on her face, and for the first time she looked completely peaceful. A volunteer sat near her, stroking her gently. The mother leaned her head against the person's arm. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. It was her way of saying thank you. That night, the shelter staff talked about adoption. The puppies were old enough to start finding new homes. They wanted to make sure each one went to a loving family. The next day, they started posting about the adoption online. The response was overwhelming. Many people wanted to adopt the puppies. Some lived nearby. Others were ready to travel from far away just to give them a home. The volunteers carefully selected the families, making sure the dogs would be loved and cared for forever. Within a few weeks, 2 of the puppies were adopted. Their new families shared pictures of them sleeping on soft beds, running in gardens, and playing with toys. Everyone at the shelter felt proud. They missed them, of course, but seeing them happy made everything worth it. The mother watched them leave with curious eyes. She didn't bark or cry. It was as if she knew they were safe now, but she wasn't alone. A few of her puppies were still with her, and she was surrounded by people who loved her. The volunteers often sat beside her, feeding her treats, brushing her fur, and whispering kind words. She had gone from being a stray nobody cared about to being a symbol of hope for so many. One day, the person who had first rescued her came to visit again. When the mother saw them, her tail began to move faster than ever before. She walked up to them without hesitation, Her eyes full of recognition and gratitude, the person knelt down and hugged her gently. The shelter staff smiled, watching the bond between them. It was clear that she hadn't forgotten who gave her the first taste of kindness. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the shelter felt calm and peaceful. The sound of puppies playing mixed with the gentle hum of people talking and laughing. It was a place filled with second chances. The mother dog lay on her blanket, her head resting comfortably, her eyes slowly closing. She had fought through so much, and now she finally had peace. Around her, life continued, but she no longer felt invisible. She was loved, safe, and free from pain. Outside the shelter, the world kept moving. People who had read her story online talked about it with their friends and families. Some decided to adopt strays. Others started feeding the animals on their streets. The kindness that began with one rescue was now spreading like ripples in water. It reminded people that small acts of love could create big changes. The mother dog's journey wasn't just about survival. It was about the power of compassion. She had shown that no matter how broken someone's world becomes, there is always hope waiting to be found. The people at the shelter had given her and her babies a new start, but in return she had given everyone a lesson in love and courage. That night, as the lights dimmed and the shelter grew quiet, one of the volunteers looked at her and whispered, "You made it," and in a way she had. Her journey from the cold streets to the warmth of human hearts was complete. She had gone from being abandoned by all to being surrounded by kindness. Humanity had not only saved her life, it had healed her soul. Writing. The rescue shelter was quiet that morning except for the soft sound of footsteps and the gentle barking of a few dogs. In one corner, the mother dog lay on a warm blanket, her puppy sleeping beside her. The room smelled clean, a mix of medicine and fresh food. It was a different world from where they had come from. The dark days of hunger and fear were slowly turning into days of care and healing. The first few days after their rescue were the hardest. The mother was weak and nervous. She didn't trust people yet. Every time someone came near her, she would lower her head, unsure if she was safe. But the volunteers were patient. They spoke softly, moved slowly, and never forced her to do anything. They knew she had suffered enough, and what she needed most now was time. Time to understand that she was finally safe. The shelter staff took turns sitting beside her, offering food and water. At first, she wouldn't touch anything while they were watching. She waited until they stepped away, then carefully sniffed the bowl and began to eat. The volunteers smiled when they saw her eating. It was a small victory, but for them it meant hope. Every bite she took was a sign that she was trying to live again. Her puppies were fragile, but they were fighters just like their mother. The vet examined each one, cleaned their tiny wounds, and gave them the warmth they needed. They were fed carefully, and one by one they started to open their eyes wider, move more, and make little sounds. Watching them grow a little stronger each day brought smiles to everyone's faces. It was as if life itself was slowly returning to the broken family. Days turned into weeks. The mother dog began to recognize the people around her. She no longer hid in the corner when someone entered the room. When the volunteers brought food, she wagged her tail softly. When they spoke to her, she looked up with gentle eyes full of curiosity instead of fear. The change was slow, but it was real. She was learning to trust again. Every morning, a few volunteers cleaned her space and changed the blankets. They spoke to her kindly, telling her she was beautiful and brave. Sometimes she listened with her head tilted slightly, as if she understood every word. When they brushed her fur, she didn't pull away anymore. Her coat, once dull and dirty, began to shine again. The shelter became her safe world, full of love, care, and kindness. The puppies grew fast. They started to explore, tripping over their little paws and barking at anything that moved. The volunteers laughed as they played, their joy filling the shelter with warmth. The mother watched them closely, her eyes full of pride. She was calmer now, knowing her babies were safe. Sometimes she even joined their play, wagging her tail as they tumbled around her. It was a simple, happy sight that touched everyone who saw it. As the family healed, their story spread beyond the shelter. Photos of the mother and her puppies were shared online, along with their rescue story. People from different places started sending messages, asking how they could help. Donations of food, blankets, and toys arrived at the shelter. Some people sent letters with words of love and encouragement. "Your story made us cry," one message said. "Thank you for saving them," wrote another. The kindness of strangers became part of their journey. The shelter team made sure to keep everyone updated. They posted videos of the puppies playing and the mother slowly learning to trust again. Each video got thousands of views. People were touched by the transformation. How a dog once left to die was now surrounded by love. The story reminded everyone that kindness could change lives, even the smallest ones. One evening, as the sun set outside the shelter, the volunteers gathered near the family's room. They talked about how far the mother had come. "She's different now," one of them said softly. "Look at her eyes, they're full of peace." It was true. The fear that once lived in her eyes was gone. She no longer trembled when someone reached out. She even started to wag her tail when the volunteers entered the room. It was a small gesture, but it spoke louder than words. Her bond with one volunteer grew special. That person had been there from the first day, feeding her, comforting her, and watching over her puppies. The mother seemed to recognize that care. Whenever the volunteer entered, she would stand up immediately, her eyes following their every move. Sometimes she would rest her head on their knee, her way of saying thank you. There was something pure in that connection, a quiet trust built not by words but by love. Weeks later, the puppies were big enough to walk on their own and explore more. The shelter allowed them to play outside in a fenced area, where sunlight touched their fur and soft grass tickled their paws. It was the first time they had ever felt the warmth of the sun on a safe ground. The mother sat nearby watching them play with quiet joy. Every bark, every jump, every tumble was a promise of a better future. The volunteers couldn't stop smiling. After so much pain, this happiness felt like a miracle. The mother's health continued to improve. She gained weight, her fur grew thicker, and her eyes shined brighter each day. The vet said she was completely healthy now. Everyone in the shelter celebrated that moment. They knew how close she had been to losing her life, and now she stood tall, calm, and strong. Her journey was an inspiration not just for the shelter team, but for everyone who followed her story. The shelter decided to prepare the family for adoption. They wanted each of them to go to homes where they would be loved forever. But the team also knew it wouldn't be easy to say goodbye. Over the months, the mother and her puppies had become part of their daily lives. Their presence filled the shelter with warmth. Saying goodbye would be bittersweet, but it was the next step in their story, a step toward permanent happiness. Before the adoption began, the shelter made a final video of their journey, from the day of rescue to the moment they were ready for new homes. It showed everything, the pain, the healing, and the hope. The video touched thousands of hearts. People commented with tears and love. Some said they wanted to adopt. Others said they simply wanted to thank the rescuers for reminding them of humanity's kindness. The story had gone far beyond what anyone expected. The next few weeks were filled with visits. Families came to meet the puppies, playing with them and holding them gently. The mother watched carefully each time, her eyes full of curiosity but not fear. She seemed to understand that something good was happening. When the first puppy was adopted, the staff took photos and shared them online. The puppy wagged its little tail as it left the shelter in its new owner's arms. The mother looked on quietly, her eyes soft and calm. She didn't cry or chase after them. She simply watched with peace as if she knew her baby was safe. The rest of the puppies soon found homes too. One by one, they left the shelter, each to a loving family who had promised to take care of them forever. The mother was the last to stay. The volunteers gave her extra care, more hugs, and gentle words every day. They knew her time would come too, that someone somewhere would see her and know she deserved a forever home. Even though the puppies were gone, the mother wasn't lonely. The shelter dogs had become her friends and the volunteers were her family. She walked with them in the mornings, ate her meals calmly, and spent her evenings lying in the sun near the window. There was peace in her heart now. She had come a long way, from fear to love, from pain to comfort. And though she didn't know it yet, her story was not over. Somewhere beyond those shelter walls, her next chapter was waiting, a chapter full of love, safety, and belonging. But for now, she was content. She had her warm bed, kind people, and a heart that finally knew what it meant to be safe. Her eyes no longer told a story of sadness. They told a story of strength, of hope, and of the power of compassion. She had been abandoned once, but now she'd been found, not just by people, but by love itself. The morning sunlight entered the small shelter room through a window, falling softly over the mother dog and her puppies. The air smelled clean and the sound of gentle barking echoed from other dogs nearby. Everything felt peaceful. The mother stretched slowly, blinking her eyes open. Her puppies, now bigger and stronger, were still asleep beside her, their paws twitching as they dreamed. For the first time in a long time, life felt normal, safe and full of promise. The days in the shelter had changed her completely. Her once tired body was now strong and healthy. Her fur shined under the light and her eyes were full of calm and trust. She had learned to enjoy the small things: a soft blanket, a kind hand, and a bowl of warm food. The people at the shelter had become her family. They talked to her gently, played with her puppies, and always made sure she was comfortable. After living a life of fear and hunger, this simple peace felt like heaven. As the puppies grew, they began to fill the shelter with energy. They ran everywhere, chasing their own tails, barking at their reflections, and climbing into everyone's laps. The volunteers laughed every day because of them. The shelter, which had once been quiet, now felt alive. Every visitor who came in left with a smile. The story of the brave mother and her puppies had touched so many hearts that people came just to see them in person. Some brought food and toys, some brought blankets, and some came just to spend time with them. Soon, it was time for the rest of the puppies to find their forever homes. One by one, kind families came forward, each one carefully chosen by the shelter team. There were hugs, photos, and even a few tears. Watching the puppies leave wasn't easy for the volunteers or the mother, but it was a moment of joy too. Each puppy was going to a place where they would be loved, protected, and never left alone again. The mother watched them leave quietly. She didn't cry or bark, she just sat there, tail moving slowly, eyes following them until they disappeared. She seemed to understand that this was a good thing. They were going where she had always dreamed they would be, in safe homes surrounded by love. The shelter staff petted her gently, whispering kind words. "They'll be okay," someone said softly. And deep down, the mother seemed to believe it. Days passed and the shelter became a little quieter. Only the mother dog remained now. She was no longer scared of people, no longer hungry or cold, but she still waited each day at the corner of her room. The volunteers noticed how she looked toward the door whenever someone entered. It was as if she was waiting for someone special. Maybe she didn't even know who she was waiting for. Maybe she was just waiting for the next chapter of her life to begin. And then, one afternoon, something beautiful happened. The person who had found her on the street, the one who had followed her to the broken wall and helped the rescue team, came back to visit. They hadn't forgotten her. The shelter had sent updates, pictures, and stories, and every time they saw her face, their heart filled with warmth. That day, they finally decided it was time to see her again. When they walked into the shelter, the mother lifted her head immediately. She sniffed the air, her ears perked up, her eyes wide. There was something familiar in the scent. When the person called her softly, she stood up and wagged her tail. A moment later, she was running toward them, her eyes full of recognition. It was as if all the memories came rushing back, the cold days, the hunger, the moment this kind soul had first placed food in front of her. She stopped right in front of them and leaned her head against their knee, tail wagging nonstop. The shelter staff watched with smiles on their faces. It was a quiet reunion, full of emotion. The person knelt down, stroking her gently. "You remember me?" they whispered softly. The mother's eyes were full of peace. She didn't bark or jump, she just stayed close, as if saying thank you without words. The person stayed at the shelter for hours that day, playing with her, walking her outside and sitting quietly under the shade of a tree. The mother walked proudly beside them, ears up, tail wagging high. The staff noticed how comfortable she looked, how natural the connection between them felt. By the time the sun began to set, everyone knew what was about to happen. The person who had saved her once wasn't going to leave her behind this time. The paperwork was simple, and the decision was even simpler. That day, the mother dog finally got her forever home. The person promised the shelter that they would take care of her always, that she would never be left alone or hungry again. The staff smiled and waved as she climbed into the car, sitting quietly on the seat beside the person. The road stretched ahead, bright with sunlight and hope. Her journey had come full circle, from being abandoned and invisible to being loved and cherished. The drive was peaceful. The mother sat looking out the window, her eyes reflecting the passing trees and open sky. She had spent so much of her life in fear and pain, but now every breath she took felt lighter. She wasn't just surviving anymore. she was living. When they reached home, she was welcomed with warmth. There was a clean bed waiting for her, a bowl of water, and a small space in the garden where she could lie under the sun. She explored everything slowly, sniffing each corner, tail wagging softly. When the person sat down beside her, she came close, rested her head on their lap, and closed her eyes. That moment was pure peace. After all the hardship, she had finally found where she belonged. Days turned into weeks, and the mother adapted beautifully to her new life. She went for walks in the mornings, played in the garden, and loved sitting quietly by the window in the evenings. She had found safety, comfort, and love. Sometimes she would lie in the garden and look up at the sky. Maybe she was remembering her past, the dark nights, the rain, and the days when she had almost given up. But those memories didn't hurt anymore. They were reminders of how far she had come, of the strength she carried inside her. Her story continued to inspire people. The shelter often shared updates about her and her puppies. People from different places sent messages saying her journey had touched their hearts. Some said her story gave them hope. Others said it reminded them to be kind to animals on their streets. The simple act of helping one stray had started something much bigger. It had reminded the world that kindness can change lives. Months later, the person who adopted her sent a message to the shelter with a picture. The mother was lying on a soft rug, eyes closed, with a peaceful smile on her face. The caption said, "She was abandoned by all, but saved by love." That one sentence summed up everything: the pain she had faced, the hope she had found, and the kindness that had brought her back to life. And that's how her story ended. Not in darkness, but in light. She had been broken, forgotten, and left to survive on her own. But humanity had stepped in. People who cared had proved that compassion still existed. She didn't just find food or shelter. She found family. Her life became proof that even in a world full of indifference, there are still hearts that beat for love and kindness. As the days went on, the mother dog continued to live her quiet, happy life. Every morning she waited by the door, ready for her walk. Every evening, she curled up beside the person who had saved her, closing her eyes with a soft sigh. The house was warm, peaceful, and full of love. Outside, the world continued to rush by, but inside, everything was calm. Her story might have started with pain and loneliness, but it ended with love and belonging. And maybe that's the most beautiful thing about life. No matter how lost someone feels, there's always a chance for a new beginning. Sometimes all it takes is one act of kindness to change everything. And so the mother who was once abandoned by all lived the rest of her days surrounded by warmth, safety, and the simple joy of being loved. Her heart, once broken, was whole again. Humanity had stepped in, and because of that, she finally got the life she had always deserved.